Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes, so if you could please grab your food, your drinks, come in and take a seat. We have quite a full morning for you, and so we want to get started before it's a little too late. Boy. That stopped the house. I'll give you a minute to get in, and then I'm going to kick us off. Okay, that's your minute. Good morning. I'm Kate Kraft, the Executive Director of America Walks. And, and it is truly my privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Everybody Walk Collaborative, the America Walks board and staff, to the third National Walking Summit. So you guys give yourself a hand. Let's see here. Right, they told me that this was going to give me some slides. All right. As all of you know, that none of this comes off without truly groups of people that make it happen, and it's my privilege to thank a number of those folks, and I'd like for them to raise their hand. We had a local host committee here in St. Paul, Minneapolis. Would you guys stand up and get a round of thanks? I think we all were out yesterday on those mobile workshops and really got to see what this town is about, and that was all because of the local host committee, so we owe them a great deal. We had a national program committee. Would they raise their hand? That was another group of people that helped us decide and format the program that you're going to experience over the next couple of days, so thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank the America Walks board and staff who have done an amazing job getting us to this place. So thank you. Raise your hand. Now let me tell you a little bit about who's in the room. Okay. As you may have heard, we're sold out. We've had a waiting list. We had to stop putting people on that waiting list. I believe right now we're at 619, and that's about 20 more than the hotel wanted us to have. So it's a pretty cool thing. 45 states, 3 countries, so that's pretty cool. We have some friends from the UK and friends from Canada here, so welcome. And I just want to mention those 5 states that aren't represented because I believe that's a target of opportunity. We have Delaware, West Virginia, Mississippi, Nebraska, and Wyoming. So if you know people there, you tell them what they've missed out on. Now let's hear a little bit more about who's in the room. How many of you, raise your hand if this is your first walking summit? Wow. Wow, that's well over 50%. How many of you were here in 2015? Raise your hand. My goodness. Let's try this. How many of you have been here for all three? 2013. That's pretty remarkable to have that many new people. I think it's a testament to all the work that you've been doing to build this walking movement. So thank you for that. I have a couple of housekeeping duties before we move on to the real program. First of all, this is one of those few occasions where we're going to say, don't turn off your cell phone, but download the app. If you're using social media, please use the hashtag Walking Summit. In 2015, we trended, and we'd like to do that again in 2017, so please do that. And there will be updates that will be coming to you throughout the day on the app, so you may want to pay attention to that. There might be some cool stuff that you'll hear about. This morning, we're going to hear from Russ Pate, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, who's going to give you the state of walking and walkability in this country so that we'll know what kind of opportunities are ahead of us. Then we're going to have a couple of keynotes, and our dear friend, Tyler Norris, is going to join us to help with those keynotes. And I just want to mention Tyler now because he won't get an introduction later on. So, if you have any questions, the America Walk staff is at the registration table, and we have on these little yellow staff tags, so please ask for anything that you need. Now, it is truly a pleasure to introduce to you Russ Pate, who is a professor of exercise science at the University of South Carolina. For over 20 years, he's led a research team that's looked at childhood physical activity in kids and youth. And he's the past president of the American College of Sports Medicine and the current president of the National Physical Activity Plan Alliance. I'm sure if you've read anything in any journal, you've read something that Russ Pate has written. So Russ, would you come up and explain to us how we're doing?
Well, good morning, everybody. It really is a thrill to be here and see so many old friends and great colleagues. And I have an exciting opportunity this morning, and I'm very appreciative to Kate and Heidi and others that have given us a few minutes here to do what I'm going to do. And it is tell you about a new national report card on walking and walkability. About 2 years ago, in the aftermath of the release of the Surgeon General's call to action on walking and walkable communities, the National Physical Activity Plan Alliance, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a second, committed to the development of a report card system that could be used to evaluate where we stand and how progress will be made in achieving many of the goals that were laid out in the Surgeon General's call to action. And so, 2 years later, as of today, we're releasing this brand new report card. National Physical Activity Plan Alliance is a coalition of national organizations that came together about 10 years ago. The mission of the organization is to maintain and expand the impact of the National Physical Activity Plan, which is a comprehensive strategic plan for increasing physical activity in all segments of the U.S. population. The goal of the report card project, which I'm going to tell you about this morning, is to assess the extent to which the U.S. population and U.S. communities meet selected standards for participating in walking and providing physical and social supports for walking behavior. I wouldn't be here presenting this morning were it not for the enormous effort of the advisory panel that created this product. And I am going to take just a moment to name them because they did an enormous amount of work on this project. Amy Eiler, Mark Fenton, Myron Floyd, Dion Jewell, Kate Kraft, Michelle Lieberman, Bill Rieger-Nash, Tom Richards, Tim Schwantes, and I should also acknowledge my cohorts at the University of South Carolina, Jen O'Neill and Lauren Reed, who staffed the project. I'm indebted to all of those people. Briefly, the methodology that we adopted was as follows. We started by establishing the panel that I just showed you. That group worked to identify factors that we thought should be included in the overall report card system, then worked to create literal and operational definitions of those factors, then went on the hunt for data sources that could be used in determining our status on those factors. Then, having found data sources in most cases, worked to identify specific indicators that could be addressed in those data sources, then adopted a grading system, and finally applied that grading system to the data drawn from the data sources to assign grades for each factor. This is the grading rubric that was adopted by the group. It's stringent. It basically says that to get an A, either 90% of people for the individually oriented factors or 90% of states for the community level factors would need to meet the standard or to achieve a grade of A. And you see the distribution of percentages on down the line. 2 person-level factors are included in the report card, one adult walking behavior and the other for kids. One, I guess, challenge we confronted in this process was, in a number of cases, the ideal data source was not available to address where we stood with a particular factor. In those cases, we took the best available data source if it applied well to the factor, but I think our group would be the first to say that in some cases, we were not able to identify the ideal data source. So there were 2 that were person-level factors, and then 7 that are community-level factors: pedestrian infrastructure, safety, pedestrian policies, institutional policies, public transportation, and walkable neighborhoods, and walking programs. These are the grades, and I'm going to pause for a moment to let this sink in. Now, the question is, what do you make of that? Well, I think a brief perusal of the scores would show that they're not what we'd like them to be. So how do you interpret that? And before I came up here a couple of minutes ago, Kate said, how are you going to make this into a good story? And I said, I'm not sure. Show up and I'll do my best. But here are some things I think should be considered as we interpret the findings. First of all, let's think about the value of having a system like this available to those of us that care so much about this issue. This creates, in a sense, a comprehensive surveillance system. It doesn't have all the elements that we wish it had, but it does pull into one location the information that we do have in key areas related to walking and walkable communities. Think of this as a baseline. This is a snapshot based on the most recently available data. The people in this room, and I'm one of them, know that progress has been made. Okay, we're not delighted with the scores here, but they are better today than they would have been 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I have no doubt about that. So this establishes a baseline as of today, and that provides an opportunity for us to see how things change in the future. I think the panel would say that the standards are rigorous but attainable. And Kate and others here who served on the committee know there were a lot of debates about exactly how to do this, but the group I found to be very committed to doing this the way they thought it should be done. And I don't think they thought we should be unrealistic about this, but they opted for standards that are rigorous, but I think attainable. Standards establish targets for the work that you all are doing and we need to continue doing. Hopefully this will give us a good way to continue the planning and implementation effort for interventions aimed at promoting walking and more walkable communities. And I think the evidence that the standards are attainable is really in the data. For both of the person level constructs, millions of people meet the standard. Now, it's not as many millions as we need it to be, but a lot of people met the standard. And the same was true for the community level constructs. Some states met each of the various standards. So I think there's evidence that shows that these standards, while rigorous, are attainable. And I will tell you that there are a fair number of states for each of the factors that were close to meeting the standard, which means that if this is replicated at some point in the future, there's every reason to think that these scores should reflect that. There's a lot of detail in this, and I do hope you will go to the report card. It's available at that URL. It's at physicalactivityplan.org, and it was posted late last night, so it should be there for you to access, and please do download it. We're not pretending that this is the perfect product, so don't hesitate to let us know if you see issues. We want to make this better over time, but I do hope you'll take a look at it and let us know what you think. And there's more to come. I hope you're interested in this, and if you are, there will be a session this afternoon where several of the folks who served on the expert panel will be present to provide more detail on where this thing came from and how the group did its work. And also coming later this fall, the National Physical Activity Plan Alliance will be releasing a comprehensive strategic plan for promoting walking and walkable communities in the U.S. It'll pull heavily from the existing national plan, but will be very specific to walking and walkability as outcomes. Again, my appreciation to Kate and everyone. Thank you so much for your attention.
Someone took my notes. There was no way I was going to remember everything I had to say. Good morning, my name's Kathy Smith, and I'm the board chair of America Walks, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. It's so great to see all your faces, and we're just so pleased to be here in St. Paul. The theme of this year's Walking Summit is Vital and Vibrant Communities and the Power of Walkability. And just think of that statement, the power of walkability. We know that vital and vibrant communities provide access to basic needs and services, encourage connections and involvement with community members and with the community at large. And the act of walking and the infrastructure that promotes walking is, for people of all ages and abilities, is fundamental to building vibrancy and vitality in communities. So with that, the team that we've heard about this morning put together 6 paths to look at how walkability contributes to the vitality and vibrancy of communities. So, vital and vibrant communities are healthy for all. We know, as George Halverson said last night, it's easier for us to be active when we have walkable places. It makes it easier for access to services and access to food. Vital and vibrant communities are community designed and safe. If designed by the community for the community, residents' voices are heard and acknowledged. Vital and vibrant communities are artistic and innovative. Creativity inspires more creativity. Vital and vibrant communities, as the deputy mayor said last night, are productive and thriving. There are a lot of economic benefits from walkable communities, and our job is to make sure that those benefits are extended to everyone in a community. Vital and vibrant communities are open and collaborative. When we have people out walking to school, walking to worship, people engage with each other and create dialogue and connections and formal and informal collaborations. Vital and vibrant communities are engaged and informed. When people make all those connections, they know what's going on in their community and have a stake in that community. So for the next day and a half, we will be together here in St. Paul at the National Walking Summit. And it's our job, or I think it's our job, the board hopes it's your job, to make this our vital and vibrant community. Here we can make connections and become engaged and informed. We can go to sessions that we hope will be inspirational and share stories about your work back at home so you can be an inspiration to your fellow attendees. And speaking of fellow attendees, check out the Walking Summit app and find the attendees that could help you grow your work back at home, wherever you live or work. Challenge yourself, go to sessions that are maybe outside your area of expertise. And there's also going to be a great opportunity to join the conversation for a national call to action, which all of you here can inform. It'll be a way for us to work together across the nation on several common strategies and stay connected throughout the year. And so we can make some progress on that report card. And the next time we come together, we won't see those same grades up there. At the end of the conference, we hope you'll leave energized and ready to tackle the next chapter of walkability. So we know we need to focus on inclusion for everyone, so people of all ages, abilities, races, and everyone has walkable communities, especially where the infrastructure has been lacking historically. So our next presenter is going to talk to us about just that and share his work in that area. He's the CEO of the new Race Forward, which was recently combined with the Race Forward and the Center for Social Inclusion. He's also the publisher of Color Lines. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Glenn Harris.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kate. I got to say thank you to Heidi and to the whole America Walks team. And I have to say to you, good morning. Good morning. That's a little better. It is so great to be here. I'm home. I live and work out of the city of New York today, but I was born here in Minnesota, right? I was born in Pipestone, Minnesota. Yeah? Some love for Pipestone? Close enough? Father was in the military. There used to be Air Force Base close there, but I was actually born on an Indian reservation. And I named that because I'm going to come back to it as we talk about what does mobility mean, and as we think about issues of racial equity. And I'm hoping that I can get, there it is. And now I have to go back. There. So what I'm hoping to do in a very few minutes is talk to you a little bit about the role of mobility as we think about racial equity, and what that means for where we live, right? And I hope it will tie in some ways to thinking about the report card as well, so make sure I come back to that, Russ. So as was said, literally in July, the Center for Social Inclusion and Race Forward, we merged very similar organizations. We are a national organization now working on issues of racial justice and really thinking through sort of policy and strategy as we think about solutions for some of the critical challenges facing our communities. So why race? So racial inequity in the United States, it doesn't matter what social indicator you look at, whether we're talking education, whether we're talking health, whether we're talking criminal justice. The reality is that race is the leading indicator of outcome, or close to the leading indicator for outcome, including class in the United States in 2017. Folks, last year, Ferguson report came out. I don't know if many folks had a chance to read it. If you haven't, I encourage you to. It's a powerful document that was in the wake of all of the tragedy that had come out of Ferguson. It, of course, focused on issues like the role of government and, of course, policing. But it also had a statistic in it that, for me, was the most telling and devastating, which is that in Ferguson, based on zip code, the life expectancy difference is 30 years. 30 years, full lifetime. And in the United States, zip code is just a euphemism for race. We are as segregated today as a country as we were in 1964. The reality is when we think about segregation, typically we just imagine certain folks being in one place and certain folks being in another. But segregation and the history of segregation in the United States, deeply rooted in a complex set of ideas that were both segregation, but also containment, right? And disinvestment. And those things combined have resulted in the communities that we see today. I know America Walks is going to be doing a webinar series, Walk to Justice. Please, if you get a chance, participate. The folks who are presenting that material are some of the most brilliant minds in the country, and they'll really do a deep dive on what some of that history looks like. The things I would name is, as we think about containment, the reality is that if we even think about loitering laws in the United States, they were created to keep people from actually moving from one area to another, in particular black folks, from moving from one neighborhood to another. So containment, a fundamental ideal of what it meant for segregation in the United States, right? The piece that I want to talk about, I'd love to spend the rest of my time having that conversation, but the piece I really want to talk about is why and how is that possible? How is it possible that 60, 70 years after the civil rights movement, we have outcomes that are the same or worse based on race in the United States? And so I'm going to ask you all to do this with me. It's the quickest way I know how to do it. Think of a number between 1 and 10 and don't tell anybody. You got your number? Multiply that number times 9, and this is where you want to take your time. Because if you're over 40 especially, it's been a while, I'm just saying. You got your number? Yeah? No, it's like I gotta get out the calculator. Okay, so if you have your number, if it's a 2-digit number, I want you to add them together. If you have a single digit, don't worry about it. But if it's a 2-digit number, for example, if it was 32, it'd be 3 plus 2 equals 5. You want to come back to a single digit. With me? Got it? Subtract 5, minus 5 from that number. You got it? Now what we're going to do is you're going to convert that into a letter. So A is 1, B is 2. Are you with me? Got your letter? Okay. Think of a country that starts with that letter. This is my entire presentation, folks, so work with me. Got your country? We're getting close. Got your country? Last letter in your country's name, think of an animal that starts with that letter. Got it? Last letter in your animal's name, think of a fruit that starts with that letter. You good? Okay, so how many folks are thinking about those kangaroos in Denmark eating oranges? If you got Denmark kangaroo orange, raise your hand. Raise your hand. It's okay, you can admit it. Okay, so here's the deal. Besides being slightly entertaining and a great great magic trick, how does that work? What happened? I can tell you this, 70 to 90% of people in the United States, when asked that series of questions, will say Denmark kangaroo orange. Why? Any thoughts? Say it, you gotta holler at me, folks.
Because Denmark's so pedestrian friendly.
True. That is true. But before that, what it really is that the math is a distraction. If you did the math right, and it's okay if you didn't, I got it wrong first time. You should have ended with the number 4. Everybody in the room should have. And so thus you should have started with the letter D. And really, there's only one question out of those 9 questions, which is what country starts with the letter D? That's it. That's the entire trick. Anybody get something besides Denmark? Dominican Republic. Djibouti, that's my favorite. Right? And Dominica are the 4 formally recognized countries by the UN. So we know there's a little bit of bias at play, but let's even give ourselves that bias, right? Because if we were all sitting in the Caribbean right now, which we might think about in the future, and I said what country starts with the letter D, I'm guessing a few more folks might say Dominican Republic or Dominica. So we know we have a bias going. But give ourselves that, how many animals start with the letter K? Koala, kiwi. Turns out there's literally dozens. And how many fruits start with the letter O? I had to Google that. There's 6. Olive is a fruit. There's a few others. Here's the thing, whole point of this. 70, 90% of people in the United States say Denmark kangaroo orange to a set of questions in which there's over 1 million possible answers. So it turns out that even when we think we're starting with our own ideas, that there's a whole set of history, culture, structure, and institutional practice that drive all of us endlessly to the same outcome, again and again and again. And so when we look around and we say, how is it possible that we don't see change when it comes to issues like racial equity, when it comes to issues like walkability, Denmark kangaroo orange? Somebody in this room will wake up tomorrow and say, I have the world's greatest idea about how we fix this, Denmark kangaroo orange. You with me? So the fundamental question for us as we think about race and equity in our communities is, how do we interrupt that process? How do we get to 1 million possibilities, right? So I am going to go through this really quickly because of my time. We believe that one of the ways we interrupt that process is through a series of 3 strategies. One is that we have to normalize our conversations around race and equity in the United States. We need to understand our history and we need to define our terms collectively. 2, we need to organize. We need to bring ourselves together to really think about those possibilities. If I had started the conversation by simply asking what countries start with the letter D, we would have named all 4. We need ourselves together and we need to hear each other. You with me? Finally, operationalize. It is great that we're together. It is great that we actually understand our history and we are sharing similar terminology. None of that matters if we don't put it into practice and we're not evaluating its outcome. Thus, the essential need for things like the report card, right? So, all of that has to sit in a vision, and that vision needs to be centered in those who are most impacted. Equity is a simple idea. If we fix what is most harmful to those in our community who are most vulnerable, We will always come up with a solution that works better for all of us. That's it. Favorite piece about the conversation about race, and I'm so happy to be here having this conversation. This is a survey study. 2 questions. First question, are you comfortable in talking about race? Nearly 90% of people said, yes, I am. Second question was, is your neighbor comfortable in talking about race? And nearly 90% of people said, no, they are definitely not. That is our national conversation on race, and we have to change it. We have to fix it. So how do we fix it? In my remaining time, I'm going to give you one example of how we might think about how this works and how it relates to mobility in our communities. So from Federal Housing Administration, how we actually decided who could get loans and who could own houses in the United States, all driven by race, right? I wish I could go deeper, but I'm not. Parks. If you want to find out where parks are in the United States, just look anywhere where they're not black and brown people. It's just truth. Street lighting. Somebody had said to me street lights were a fundamental racial equity issue. I'd have been confused. But about a decade ago, I had the opportunity to be working on these issues for the city of Seattle. And at the time, we had a series of shootings. 5 young black men died within the period of about 3 months. I think the oldest was 15. And we were deeply concerned. It occurred in a community in the Rainier Valley in Seattle. It is the most diverse community there. It's 80% people of color, 50% below the poverty line, 40% immigrants and refugees. And so the mayor at the time did a classic mayor move. He said, I want to tour the neighborhood, and decided to do it in the evening. So loaded a bunch of government bureaucrats into a van and rolled down the major thoroughfare, Rainier Avenue. And the mayor noticed that a street light was out and said, there's a street light out, why is it out? And of course, the person from the light utility was like, oh, I'm on it, Mayor, I'll find out. At the time, we had just implemented the use of a racial equity analysis in thinking about policy and practice. And to the city light workers' credit, that's exactly what they did. They went back, they not only went back and had a conversation about why that street light was out, but they applied an analysis. So one of the first things they did is they went out and they actually counted how many lights were out. And it turns out that there wasn't a couple street lights out, there were over 80 street lights out along this community's major thoroughfare. And I can tell you right now, there was no other neighborhood in Seattle that had 80 streetlights out. It turns out that at the time, the system being used was a complaint-based system. Light burns out in front of your house, your business, you call the city comes out, changes the bulb. Why would that not work for a community that's 80% people of color, 40% immigrants and refugee, and more than half of them are below the poverty line? Why? They don't know it. They don't understand what the system is. Language, trust. In a minute, we could figure out why that system is a failure. But why did we have that system? Because we've always had that system, right? Short of it is, went to a new system geographic. Turns out light bulbs have a life expectancy, and it's literally written on them. So if you write down the day you put the light bulb in, and you come back 3 years later, whether it's burnt out yet or not, it's gonna burn out, and you can change it. It turns out that that's cheaper than actually running from point A to point Z across the city looking for the next light bulb that's burnt out. It turns out it's the #1 thing we can do for communities in terms of public safety, and it turns out that it's essential for people feeling like they can walk and they have mobility in their communities. All of that led to a whole series of conversations within the city about what were other complaint-based systems that carry that kind of privileged bias. And it resulted in the largest series of policy changes around racial equity across the city of Seattle from this one concept of what does it mean to have meaningful streetlights. Last piece I'll end with on this is, who do you think thanked the mayor for the change in the policy? I'll tell you. It wasn't the folks in Rainier Valley. It was the folks on the north end of the city who were middle class or better and largely white. because they were tired of calling. Because when a system isn't working for those who are most vulnerable in our community, it's not working for anybody. Just some of us are paying a higher price for it. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Glenn, my friend, so good to see you. What an important message. Let's give Glenn another acknowledgement for his extraordinary talk on our behalf. It has been such a delight to know you and your work over these years, and thank you for this important message around inclusion, and which is going to be the theme of this morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Norris. I'm the Chief Executive of Wellbeing Trust, which is a new national foundation as part of a $1 billion commitment of Providence St. Joseph Health to improving the mental, social, and spiritual health of the country. And there's nothing more important to what we can be doing every day for that end than walking. So I am thrilled to be here as part of this family. This movement has come a tremendous long way since Pro-Walk, Pro-Bike, Pro-Place 2012, when a number of us, and I see a few people here in the room here, had the first formative conversation about what could become this Everybody Walk movement that has gone by so many names. Deb Hubsmith, our late friend, Scott Bricker, Kate, Ken, Joan, Kevin, and so many of the people in this room helped launch an initial conversation about how we might get started in late 2012. Well then, Hurricane Sandy swatted us back, and we came back 6 weeks later with more people, more energy, and more focus that led to the first summit in 2013. To be here after a great summit in 2015 and now 2017, I don't know whether you listen to Kanye or Kelly Clarkson, but their lyrics are basically the same. What don't kill you makes you stronger. And so as we think about where we are right now, I believe this movement for walking and walkable places that practice inclusion for all, whether you walk, whether you roll, however you get around, but how we move our bodies together when possible, is stronger than ever. And if we listen to what Glenn said, Kate, Kathy's beautiful opening, and Russ's framing of the opportunity here, this movement is more relevant than ever. And in the words of Jay Waljasper, our great sort of framer, chronicler of this movement, the walking revolution is alive in this nation again. Yay, Denmark, but yay, America, for getting our act together finally and creating safe places for people to walk as a routine way of getting around. Whether we talk about the health of people, the health of place, the health of planet through reducing our carbon footprint, or to the work we're doing right now around improving mental, emotional well-being and social inclusion, walking and rolling and being with each other is so important. My brief theme this morning, as I prepare to bring up our next keynoter, is the theme of radical inclusion. It was said beautifully by one of our friends of this movement, Siobhan Arline Bradley, who worked very closely with both Surgeons General, but particularly Vivek Murthy, who helped advance the Surgeon General's call to action on walking, who said, the question is everybody welcome? Like, really welcome? Is this just for some folks in some places that have walkable places for them, or is this really, really, really for everyone? And what are we doing to make sure that it is there? I want to tell you a little story about some work in the Middle East. But I was schooled on inclusion by the former Grand Mufti of Syria, who, of course, as a Muslim, was talking to us about the Christian tradition and about the teacher of the Christian tradition. He said, the practice of your tradition from your homeland, he's speaking about Christianity, not that we're not far broader, but that was his language at that time, is not just inclusion, it's radical inclusion. Radical meaning root. And this man was very skilled in English, and he was saying, are you practicing radical inclusion? Some of you may know that 10 years ago this month, about 30 of us helped initiate something called the Abraham Path, the Masar Ibrahim al-Khalil, a route of cultural experience, a walking route that started in the footsteps of Abraham and Sarah from Turkey through Jordan, or through Syria, through Jordan, into Palestine, into Israel, to Egypt for Muslims, all the way to Mecca. And the Abraham Path exists, and in fact, you can walk it in most places. Obviously, Syria and some other places not possible right now. But the program was going really well in 2017, and we had agreements from all of these countries to help open the path in their nation. And in Palestine, it was moving in a way the strongest. There was such an opportunity to build this route from Jenin in the north, I'm speaking of the West Bank, not Gaza, from Jenin in the north all the way to Hebron, or Al-Khalil, the friend of God, right? This incredible route. But as often happens, we had people from all three of the Abrahamic faiths in the room, and even with the agenda going right, we got snagged, right? And it started finger pointing at the other, and it was religious and cultural, and walls are the opposite of paths, and you can imagine what started sort of burning. And we, sort of, oh my God, it's falling apart. And the imam in Ramallah and the rabbi who had come across from Jerusalem said, we're here to open the Masar, a walking route. Let's walk and talk it out. So we got stuck, but we ended up on a walk, and they went out first, and the whole thing opened back up. And we came back about an hour later after this walk and kind of hoping and praying and thinking, God, can we find a way forward? And these two men who had been sort of at the focal point of the snag sort of said, we have found a way through. And when you walk side by side with the other, all things are possible, including this path. And to this day, the path in Palestine is the strongest part of the Abraham path. When we walk side by side with the other, all things are possible. So to this day, I walk to work. I walk when I have difficult times, when I don't know what to do. When I don't know how to work something out with someone. Because there's something, hey Glenn, can we demo? If we were opposing each other, this might be too close.
Yes,
right?
I would clearly be.
Yeah, maybe like your hand, right? But we could be not agreeing and walking like this and even bumping elbows in the same direction. And it would be a very different thing, even if we were opposing. So that was what they were teaching us at that point. And I walked to discern. In fact, we're hiring 3 people right now. And I have walked, in one case, rolled with our new candidates because I don't really know how I want to work with these folks until I can have that walk and talk about family and kids and works and hopes and dreams as well as the job. And I walk for joy. Like my Palestinian friend, the author of Palestinian Walks, Raja Shahade, said, he talks about the sarha, which is a Palestinian tradition. He said, where you wander, not restricted by time or place. His other joke about it, he says, it's a drug-free Palestinian high, the sarha, right? So in that spirit of walking for all of these reasons, we are blessed to have with us here today someone who is an embodiment of radical inclusion, including walking, rolling, strolling, to work, to play, to discern, for difficult times, for everyone, where everybody is welcome. Miss Wheelchair America 2005, a voice for access for all, particularly those of differing abilities, a leader working with Department of Education on many strategies across this country, and a person who, when I first got to meet her in late 2012, reminded me that all things are possible. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Juliette Rizzo. Wonderful. Now, what's the right place for you? You good here?
Can you see me? Can you see
Do you want
me?
to? Can you slide to the side, maybe?
Can you see me now?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Here it comes.
You can? This is what it means to use your power. To take a stand, to be seen, and to be visible as a visible leader. People with disabilities are often missing in the media mix, in the mirror, at conferences like this, and even at the table. But not here today. Because of you, we are visible and engaged in a very, very important conversation. This is my very first walking conference, and I feel welcome. As I was leaving Maryland to come here, and I was boarding my accessible shuttle to the airport, my neighbor asked where I was going. He just happens to be an attorney in the disability rights movement. When I told him I was giving a keynote address at the America Walks conference, he asked me to let you know something. He said, "Do they know they're making history? Do you know you're making history? Give yourselves a hand for that." If you would have asked me last year if I would have seen anybody with a disability giving a keynote address at this conference, I'm not sure I ever would have thought of this for me. I would have said no, but as a really good manager, I know it's not about no. It's how we all get to yes. When Kate first reached out to me and invited me, I couldn't even say yes. And she does not know the rest of this. I had just seen her at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., where I spoke at a National Center on Health, Physical Activity, and Disability conference, advocating for health equality for all. That night, my blood sugar unexpectedly spiked out of control to 429. My blood pressure went to 220/120. And I blacked out, and I fell in the middle of a conversation. A severe head injury, many stitches, and a broken arm. I began a new journey as a first-time diabetic. Homebound for the last 5 months because my arm couldn't be casted because of a pre-existing swelling from rheumatoid arthritis. But most importantly, I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk the way I walk. With my arm in a splint, I couldn't drive my wheelchair. Holding on to Kate's invitation, an invitation to a national walking conference, I knew I was going to get up again. As one of my colleagues gave me a card that said, "Falling down is a part of life, but getting up is living." And a doctor pointed out that I was lucky to be alive and that I must have a lot more work to do. I realized, Kate, that work was with all of you. The doctor and I used this opportunity to heal. We used it as a goal. I gave Kate my yes. The bone grew back, the head injury closed up. I avoided high-risk surgery. My diabetes numbers are back to normal. And I'm walking again. I'm proud to say that after 5 months, this is my re-entry into the community. And I'm so glad that Kate saw my potential, the full potential of people with disabilities. To be here for me is a big step, but it's an even bigger step for your organization and for the disability community. And when I say that, I recognize what America Walks is doing, but so do several other people. Please give a warm welcome and a clap of hands for another person who's taken a big step to be here today, Sherry Melander Smith. She's your new Miss Wheelchair America from Minnesota, the first from Minnesota. And she too feels welcome here today and is that buddy that I can walk and I can roll with. And you went to a workshop yesterday with Garrett Brumfield, and I hope he's somewhere in the room. I want to give him a hand, too, for being here and helping break down the boundaries. We attended Garrett's workshop, and when we did with Jonathan Stalls, Yes, what does he say? Living life at 3 miles an hour? We challenged him to 6 miles per hour. And I don't know if he's in the room, but we worked with him beforehand. David Fenley, Minnesota's ADA and Access Coordinator from the Minnesota Council on Disability. Give him a hand for helping inform this conference. 2 years ago, the U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, he asked me to be a champion for inclusive, walkable, and rollable communities. And to do as his call to action said, step it up. You stepped it up, and I ask you to keep on stepping. Take the first step like Kate and the board have done. Be champions advocating for the inclusion of people with disabilities. Kate asked me to tell this story. It was a great champion in my life, my grandmother, my Italian nanny. She saw my potential long before I did, and some of you have had an Italian nanny. I can see what you were nodding for. And as a little girl, I struggled to walk, and I fell a lot. The physical therapist told my mother, don't help her when she's down. She needs to get up and learn to walk on her own. And my grandmother sat there in her big orange chair, and I could see the pain in her face as she wanted to help me get up and help me walk. And I can still hear her words as I stood on those weak and knobby legs as she began to sing. There she is, Miss America. She knew, yes, my nanny knew years ago the potential that I would have in this world. She knew what I was capable of. She knew the purpose for the pain. She believed in me, and I have absolutely no doubt that she was with me on that stage as I got the opportunity that Sherry has to empower 54 million people with disabilities and the others that live with them. My grandmother was and is one of my greatest champions, and I ask you here today to be that great champion for people with disabilities, to be that advocate. An advocate believes in you, sticks up for you when you are at risk for being excluded, when you're not even counted in some of those numbers because you are invisible. Advocates uphold inclusion, transforming communities based on social justice principles, and you've heard of some of those today. Advocates are the voices for those who cannot speak, not just not speak, maybe not hear, maybe not see, maybe not walk, maybe not think clearly, maybe have an amputation. An advocate commits to the idea of justice and equality and is willing, despite the circumstances, to persevere and speak out when necessary to affect social change for their fellow man. You have that power as an individual. Are you willing to own it? I asked a question. Are you willing to own your power to transform the walking community? Yes. And louder? Yes. I spoke to a young lady in here the other day, and she said she's willing to advocate for and influence policy to say no on behalf of her fellow pedestrians with disabilities when a construction contractor closes off a sidewalk because it's cheaper than closing down a lane of traffic. For those of us with differing abilities, that shutdown could be absolutely catastrophic when we accidentally step the wrong way because others don't realize we received mobility training to learn the route, or we can't process the change because of a developmental disability or a mental health disability. Are you willing to be that advocate? Yes. Are you willing to advocate that systems and cities designed to meet the needs of people with disabilities will meet the needs for everyone? Yes? Yes? Do you believe what the Surgeon General believes? That inclusion is a winnable battle. Do you believe it? Step 2, to support inclusion, I need you to join the diversity discussion. It's not about us. It's not about them. As Sherry and I had the conversation and we're discussing it yesterday, we are they. Disability is a part of life naturally. Disability is the one minority group that any one of us can join on any given day. If you live long enough, you will have a disability. So let's give ability the proper place it deserves in conversations along with zip codes and age and economic status and culture, all of which influence our daily activities. In my travels as Miss Wheelchair America, one young lady in New York said to me, You realize it's a world of diversity, right? And you realize what we want, right? I said, what? She said, exactly what everyone else does. Do you know what the acronym DISABLED stands for? And it begins with a D. Deserving individuals seeking a better life, an education, and a date. We want what everybody else wants. And when I shared that with the Surgeon General, I changed it up a little bit. I said, deserving individuals seeking a better life, exercise, and a date. Can we go for that? She made me realize it's not our differences, it's about what we have in common. And we have more in common than you think. Some of us joined us yesterday at the Center for Independent Living for People with Disabilities, where Lisa, a consumer, shared her voice about how transportation works for her and how the timing is important. Not only is there the independent living movement, but there's Olmsted, providing people with disabilities the tools and the resources to live, work, and play in the communities of their choice. Does that sound familiar to you? It should. Your very own Heidi Simon, give her a hand for all of this, shared with me that walking and walkable communities are where people have access to school, work, play, and business in a way that we can address the disparities and grow communities. We have a parallel vision. We speak the same language. And as Kate said to me last night, we are all in this together. My friend Corey has disabilities, developmental disabilities, and he just started walking with a buddy, Stanley, this week. He said to me, it's fun to walk together, he said. Walking is free happiness. And together, yes, that's what he said, walking is free happiness. Give him a hand. He's not here, but give him a hand. And together, I need your help when others don't speak the language of inclusion. Like when my accessible van didn't show up on time and it was 2 hours late and I thought I would have to walk from Washington, D.C. here. When others don't speak the language of inclusion, when the snow is plowed into the curb cuts and I have to dangerously enter the street like a car because there's no other way. Like when a driver got out of his car at an intersection yelling at me to get off my cell phone while driving. Excuse me, sir, I'm walking. Like when I watched out of the plane window and my wheelchair fell off the conveyor belt. Like when I arrived at the hotel the other night, late in the morning, only to find that the room was not accessible at all. There was no turning radius. And I had to advocate in a sold-out hotel when they said there were no options. See me as the person and not the problem. Have an accessible attitude. Recognize that equal access is a civil right, and not just a civil right, it's a human right for all of us. It took the management, it took 2 engineers to redesign, like so many of you do every day, that room that night and move the heavy furniture that was not only blocking my path, but was blocking the path of Marie. Marie can't stand up because I couldn't do this without you, but it was blocking her access to my room to provide the services she needed to through the adjoining room. Now, the hotel has been absolutely gracious and accommodating. But I'm still wondering if I'm going to get the bill for the furniture that 416 stole in the middle of the night. You know, this wheelchair can haul a bus, so anything is possible. Most importantly, I need you to lead the change to dispel the stereotypes. Dispel them, please. And don't look at us for what we can't do. Look at us for what we can do. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and with rheumatoid arthritis, if you don't move it, you will lose it. I need you. The cardiovascular risks are high for me. Did you know that sitting is more dangerous than smoking? 50% of adults with disabilities don't get enough aerobic exercise. I do not want to be a couch potato, or as we say, a chair chip. I don't want to be that person. I'm diagnosed as morbidly obese, but I will not claim that definition. I will claim the opportunity to walk and exercise like everybody else. There are so few places I can go because they're not affordable gyms, and they may not be accessible gyms, but walking and rolling are always affordable. Making a town more accessible doesn't even have to be expensive. Just include the disability community in your conversation and we'll help you figure out the ways. Sometimes it's as simple as doing what we're doing here today, a change of attitude. I can walk. You know why? Because walking is about getting from point A to point B. I do that. As far as I'm concerned, I power walk from a power chair. It's not about how you do it. Nick Pad's campaign says some use 2 legs, some use 2 wheels. Make walking an inclusive term, please. Rolling around in a wheelchair is an aerobic activity. I'm breathing right now with my hand on this joystick. I am moving and I am experiencing exercise. I met my colleague Augie at a conference and he asked me to go walking with him. Would you do that for me? Can I go walking with you? Before I lost my abilities to walk, I was walking around a track at my college. And as I did, I was looking at each and every one of you and looking at what you could do, but not looking at what I could do. And as I sat there and looked at you with your long legs, power stroking, power walking, I didn't realize what was going on. I didn't realize that I could lead a walking movement from where I was at because I was too busy looking at what I couldn't do. And I turned around and I heard it, Coach, Coach, look at that. And it was 50 Special Olympians looking at me and how fast I walked around the track. You can lead from wherever you are, so please step up and use your power. Use your power to be a walking champion. Use your power to sit at the head of the table, to have the disability diversity discussion. My platform as Miss Wheelchair America was, find your courage, share your vision, and I ask you to help me change the world. I've made a commitment to my health despite my disability, and I'm here to tell you I take the commitment seriously, and I hope you take what Kate and this entire organization have started, and you make that commitment to make sure that people with disabilities are included, that your next walking pin has wheels or canes or anything else on it. Kate, can you do that for me? Atticus said, walk towards the good in life, and one day you will arrive. I have arrived. Sitting down. But today I proudly take a stand with America Walks to advance the inclusion agenda for people with disabilities. And remember, you don't even have to walk to push forward. So let's put my tire tracks and your footprints all over this country. Let's continue to walk the mile in all of our shoes. Our next 10,000 collective steps can improve the lives of many people with disabilities. Today, like my Italian Nani, you are my new champions. Champions of not only walkability, rollability, but possibility. Thank you. You walk, I roll, and I hope you find the courage to join us as America walks stronger together. Is that what you wanted?
You look fabulous. Thanks.
Okay. You did so great on time.
Okay. Okay.
Feel it, sister. Feel it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Juliette, thank you. And don't go so far because your beautiful talk and relative parsimony and that of our previous speakers have given us about 15 minutes. So what we'd like to do is, you can stand where you are or come up or whatever works, but we have 15 minutes. If anyone would like to ask Juliette or Glenn or Kathy or Russ or
Come
Kate
up here, Glenn.
any question or comment or lift up on what was said. So please stand up, and I don't know if there are mics, but if not, just give it your best. Blast it out. Say who you are.
I'm Katie from Boston. Glenn, you had mentioned that you were going to get back to the story about the reservation.
Oh, and I didn't.
Yeah.
You were so good. Thank you for that. I actually meant to come back to it when I was actually talking about containment and segregation. That the reality is reservations were created, again, not as just a way for separating people, but to contain people. And back to this overall theme about what the restraint of mobility has meant historically in communities and how it's actually manifested today in our communities. Does that make sense to folks? Did you want to add anything? No? You good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Over here, John. Let everybody know your name.
Yeah, John Wetmore with pedestrians.org. We had the discussion of the equity implications when you're in a complaint-based system. How does the complaint-based system apply to how the ADA is enforced in this country?
He's handing it to me. You know, I am not an expert, on the ADA. I'm an expert as a person with a disability on how I experience the, walkable community. Do you have an actual answer to this specifically? She's raising her hand. Both of us are going to defer to you if you have the actual answer. Do you? Seriously. Seriously. Find an equitable way. I like that answer. Go ahead.
If you are working off of any complaint-based system, I can promise you right now it's inequitable, period. So street lights was an example, right? Curb cuts, sidewalks, potholes, right? We can keep going down this entire list. Whether a building is actually ADA accessible, right? By law, they're supposed to be. It's only enforced right now in most cities when people complain, right? So this piece of moving beyond complaint-based systems to being really clear about what are the systems that we are going to mandatorily enforce, right? That are going to work for everybody. What are the universal policies that we're going to create that we actually are saying we simply do, takes away the responsibility and the burden on those who are most vulnerable, and shifts the dynamic about what it actually means for access in our communities. Does that make sense to folks?
And this is a perfect example of the conversations that we need to be having together.
Yes.
Hi there, Sarah Mers from Raleigh, North Carolina, and formerly from St. Paul. I've got a question about equity and first step. So everybody's talking about equity, and people kind of aren't doing it or don't know what to do. And so as a first step, would you suggest a specific training? Would you specifically suggest like starting with planners, starting with elected officials, starting in the nonprofit world to push it? Wherever there's the most energy, what do you recommend as a first step?
I think as a first step, if you go back to what I said in my speech, it's lead from where you are and look deep within yourself and see where your gifts and talents are and where they might fit. Sometimes I work in Washington, D.C., and so many times in Washington, D.C., we tend to start at the top. The challenge with starting at the top, though, is we're trying to drive a message down when a lot of the individuals that have the most important information to contribute are actually at the grassroots. And if we start at the grassroots and we start with those who may or may not have a voice and we help them get a voice, whether it is becoming that voice by becoming the elected official yourself, or whether it's becoming an advocate through taking advocacy training courses, even in the disability community, we have, and I know Garrett has just come through this training as well, partners in policymaking, where we learn to become the advocates that we need to advocate for that equity that is needed within all communities, especially the disability community. Those are just some, baseline ideas.
They're, in my mind, the critical baseline ideas, right, is start with who's most impacted. And I would just add, like, if you're asking yourself, like, what can I do? Yeah, have the conversation. One thing I do want to really name, and I so appreciated because I thought you so beautifully named this in the positive. I want to name it in the negative, which is equity can just be a bunch of talk. Just being real with folks, right? In many ways, it can become the new coconut water, right? It's like, sounds so good. It's water, folks. And and in that way, it's really important that we get folks to tangible change. So yes, I think it's really important that we get real about not only what does this mean for us as individuals, how do we center communities most impacted, but what are the literal practice policy changes that need to occur? What are the institutional changes that need to occur to get us there? And if we're not getting to those conversations, if we're not coming up with those ideas, and we're not measuring whether or not they're having an impact, it's just talk. So just want to center that in a real way.
And I would just add to that, gather those people around the table that would add to the conversation. You may not be the one to have the conversation. You may not be the one to be the policymaker or the great leader, mayor, whatever it is, but you might be the consummate connector that can, as I'm a PR person, and so somebody once said, that one of the greatest PR people in this country was Henry Ford. Could Henry Ford build a car? No, but he knew 24 people who could. Gather those 24 people up and bring them to the table.
You.
Let's keep this conversation going right here, please, in the gray. Right behind you is the mic.
Penny Landry, I'm a Louisiana native, and I'm currently in Nutley, New Jersey. I have an idea for you, since you're the first person I've met who's actually working in D.C. There's a population that we could reach out to advocate, both for walking, for biking, for disability. These people are on the streets 24/7 on our roads and on our highways, and they could be a tremendous advocacy group, and they are the future of our roads. They are Uber and Lyft drivers, and someone somewhere, if you could reach out to our Uber and Lyft drivers, because they need the education that we're getting here, because they're driving us around on our streets. They see what needs to be done, and a lot of them also are breaking the rules. So if anybody has a connect to Uber and Lyft, please reach out to them and see if we can some way educate those drivers who are 24/7 moving us around this country. Thank you.
Thank you for that point well taken. And what I will add to that is, please, whoever decides to do this, make sure that you remember the disability perspective and those of us who would just as easily like to take a quick on-call ride, which is typically not available to us. I see you ready to clap back there, so that we might use Uber and Lyft as well.
Thank you. Right here, please.
Marshall Stair from Knoxville. Could you talk a little bit about gentrification? Because in our community, there were some efforts made to make an area walkable, but a lot of the residents in that community saw it as sort of the first steps in gentrifying and potentially displacing communities of color. And so it's a challenge for me as a walk advocate to support that, but then address the concerns of that community.
Thank you. I think that's right now maybe one of the most important questions that's occurring across the country in our cities. How do we actually bring improvements into our communities that don't actually result in displacement of folks who have historically lived in those communities? So one of the things, and I just come back to it, Juliette, and it's really in this way, it turns out that the question we should be asking anybody in any given community when we go into it isn't what we think they need. It's what do they need? And that question creates a different space when we are going into a community and assuming that what's good for me is good for you. There's a lot of reasons why people don't trust that, a lot of history to that, right? So I think in that way, first and foremost is, are the things we're naming as things we know are universally good for folks, like the ability to walk, right, and access to walking? How does that actually leverage what people feel like are their immediate needs in their communities? And if you're not addressing them, you're not being honest about really centering who communities are, right? So want to name that, and I'll stop. See if Jim wants to.
And just to add to that, I think it makes for a very important point when we look at the theme of this conference. When we saw the wonderful video with the 2 young people in it promoting the conference, we saw some great little sound bites go across the screen, and one of them was that this conference provides more choices. And for people with disabilities, many times the choices are removed. And when we don't speak to the person with a disability, we speak to the person that they're with. Oh, she'd like that purple suit. I happen not to like purple. I do like purple. But, speak directly to the group, at hand and allow the opportunities for, personal choice.
Love. The very last thing I would name is, if we are not tying our improvement strategies to anti-displacement strategies, we are failing. It's just honestly, there's no way we see it nationally. If we making multi-million or billion-dollar investments in mobility into communities who've been historically disinvested for 50, 100 years, there's no way that it's not going to result in gentrification, and there's no way it's not going to result in displacement if we do not put in active strategies to address it on the front end. So just naming that and being real. Are we connecting the two?
Thank you. So a question for Juliette, actually. My name is Chris Englert. I'm with Urban Hiking Denver. We are planning a roll and stroll event on one of our urban hikes on Urban Trail. I'm wondering if you can help me think about distance from your point of view, and from life versus 3 miles per hour versus 6 miles per hour, if you could help me think about that. Thank you.
Once again, and I am very excited, give her a hand for putting together another run, walk, roll, stroll. And in terms of distance, this gets asked a lot of times in the communities. And, I go back to something again for me in PR, and I'm not going to go into the technical side of, anything. I'm just going to say that when it comes down to the spirit of creating an event, period, end of story, it's about the spirit of co-creation. So make sure that we're asking that question of the people that have bubbled up and come to the table, because whereas yesterday, Garrett and I and Jonathan were looking at what do we do with a mobile walking workshop that focuses on disabilities, when it might be 2 to 3 to 4 hours, and it might be 2 to 3 to 4 miles. Well, one of the things that worked for us yesterday was to put some disclaimers out up front that allowed people to participate to the extent of their abilities. And while that may not be so specific for you, I do hope it helps.
I think that's what we have time for now. Glenn, Juliette, thank you so much for your important messages. It's an honor to have you with us.
Okay, do you want me to go first, or you want me to go?
I'll let you go last. I have one housekeeping item. Sorry to bring that up. We are full. We have oversubscribed. So if there is a workshop you absolutely want to go to, get there early, because no doubt there will be some people disappointed when they can't get into the ones they want to go to. So forewarned, forearmed. Hold on. Okay.
So just 1 minute, and we'll wrap up. If you have not already, download the app. There is not only the full program there and everything, but dialogue, news, updates, download it, it's easy, etc. As Kate said, go to your session. But before we wrap up, I just want you to know that in this room is an extraordinary group of people, and if you have a challenge that you're facing, something you're trying to work through, I guarantee you that in this room is the asset, the person, the thinking that you need. So please find them. And with that, I want to again remind us, when George Halverson and I found him sitting next to me on the plane last night flying here, It is extraordinary what has happened. And I want to again have us thank those who have stepped up as sponsors. First of all, my alma mater, Kaiser Permanente, represented by Brittany Giles and John Vu, who are here. One of our longest-term partners, and I don't know who else here, but Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota, represented by Jill Chamberlain and her team. And of course, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and a whole host of other sponsors who have made this possible. This doesn't happen without resources. And if you think you can be part of that, please talk to me about how you can join Wellbeing Trust and others in making this happen. Go to your sessions. Look forward to the conversation with you over the next 24 hours.